Good day, everyone. Today we're going to be covering the Modern Analytics Academy, and this session will be covering visualizations. My name is Jason Virtue, and I am a cloud solution architect here at Microsoft, and I've been working with me and my colleagues to help develop the content for Modern Analytics Academy. When it comes to our speakers that we've had in the past, you can see this list of great rock stars who have developed some great content for the Modern Analytics series. And the content that has been delivered over the past 4 weeks is listed on this slide. Today, we'll be covering visualizations. And if you missed one of the previous sessions, please feel free to go back and watch that. The link in the lower left-hand corner is available to you. You can click on aka.ms/MAA to watch that content as needed. So today we'll be talking about visualizations. And when we talk about visualizations, we're going to be talking about the Power BI platform. And our agenda that we'll be covering is as follows. We'll be talking about the Power BI data flows, the Power BI service, the Power BI report builder, Power BI embedded, and also Power Apps. One of the common themes that we want to talk about across all these sessions has been how can we modernize our analytical and data warehouse platform. Today, I'll be talking about how do we modernize our business intelligence applications to be able to handle net new, more modern workloads. So with that being said, let's jump in. One of the first areas I like to cover is help define what a Power BI reference architecture looks like. So we have the same starting point and we understand that migration path nicely. I'm going to be sampling from a white paper that was developed by Melissa Coates. She and a few of her co-authors have published a white paper that the link is in the lower left-hand section of this slide. This content is really great because it helps us understand the different deployment options for Power BI, and I selected 2 of those deployment options, one for Enterprise BI and the other one for Embedded Analytics. So let me jump in and first cover the Enterprise BI one. The target audience that we're thinking of is our enterprise corporate customers who will be working with their system integrators to help deploy this to their production environments. One of the great things about this workload is it does not require any previous experience with the cloud. So if they are net new to the cloud or they've done this many times in the past, either way, that's great. This hybrid architecture allows the data warehouse to be on-premise or in the cloud, their choice. Their OLTP systems or their source systems to be on the cloud, in the cloud or on-prem. That hybrid architecture allows the flexibility that they need to design it for their needs. What is required to be in the cloud is the reports, their data sets, their dashboards, and their workbooks. And so the analytical reports will be serviced in the Power BI service, and our customers can basically have their developers use tools like Report Builder, Desktop, or Excel to develop content and to host that in a workspace in the Power BI service, and then to publish that out as an app so that their consumers or customers can start to view that content as needed via a mobile app or a web browser. One of the great things about this architecture is it can scale on demand, or they can pay as they go, meaning that if they want to add a capacity that says we need to be twice the size at night to do our loads than we are during the daytime, or everybody comes in from 8 to 10 and the system is not that active thereafter, we can use the premium capacity to right size that environment for their particular workload needs. Now, one of the other reference architectures that sit out there is embedded analytics. And this is really for our ISV partners. And for this particular workload, what we're typically thinking about is our partners have already developed a business application, probably hosted in something like Azure App Service, and that application is running in their favorite programming language, be it C# or Node or Python. But one of the things that they probably do not want to have to think about or be concerned by is bringing analytics into that code set. When it talks about their application, they definitely want to be enabled to empower their customers to gain new insights from their business application. And to do that, they need to bring in different data visualizations or different data sets, but they don't want to have to think, what is the best catalog of data visualizations? Or what are the best ways of querying a database? The idea about D3 or jQuery can be deferred to the experts. And so what we provide in the Power BI service is the ability to call REST APIs. So our partners can keep the framework that they've used all the time, call these REST APIs to render dashboards, reports, or data sets. And now that workspace can be containerized for multi-tenant applications. And again, their developer community can use tools like Power BI Desktop to build the content as they need to. Now, these two patterns are what we would call the current state pattern. What I'd like to drill into a little bit more is that modern architecture and how we can migrate them from current state to this future state. In one of the sessions done by Alex Karasak, he covered data modeling. In his data modeling session, he talked about a logical data warehouse. And that logical data warehouse was sitting on top of the Azure data lake. That data lake was tiered, had different tiers. One for the raw data that's coming from our source systems, another one that was enriched that allow us to apply the data quality standards, so we had one version of the truth, and another one that was curated that was actually normalized, or more importantly, denormalized, so that it can be ready to be ingested into our star schema. Now, the thing that Alex highlighted is in our traditional data warehouse, we have a relational database, or in this case, a SQL dedicated pool, that is using data in a star schema to put on top a business intelligence tool like Power BI service to slice and dice that data as quickly as possible, or in a few seconds or less. That workload does a great job of helping us slice and dice that data and answer all of the known questions that particular report was built for. But there's still a lot of questions that are not part of that business intelligence report. And thus, we need to go find that data. It might not even be in our star schema. And thus, we have a problem where we need to start answering questions that are not part of the existing data warehouse. That's a great part about the logical data warehouse, is we can have data that sits in a data lake or a file-based system, have users bring new data in there, be it data that's coming from, say, telemetry data from mobile devices, demographics from third-party providers, maybe even some partner supply chain information. All this data can be brought into that raw layer, and now our end user, through those serverless pools, can start to query views that are targeted to those file-based systems. This makes T-SQL available to us, and now we can start using great tools like Power BI Desktop, Excel, Visual Studio Code, or Jupyter Notebooks to start to interact and query this data. And so when we talk about migration state, we're really not talking about bringing in anything net new on the analytics side of the equation. They already have those tools. What we just need to make sure is we build out that serverless tier and now start to make the Power BI service available to query that through Power BI data flows or even through tools like Power BI Desktop. So let's jump in and talk about that in a little bit more detail. We'll go into the very first feature, and that's Power BI data flows, or the idea of data wrangling. In that modernized tier, we talk about adding new analytical workloads. The traditional BI workload through the dashboards, we've done. In the new world, we want to also bring in exploratory data analysis, data science, and data discovery. And by setting up that logical data warehouse, those new workloads will be enabled, and you'll have the tools necessary to get started. One of those tools is the Power BI data flows. Annie Zhu had done a wonderful job in her session on data pipelines, uncovering Power BI data flows. She talked about its capabilities. She talked about its limitations. And most importantly, she also covered some of the decision criteria that you would use when using Azure Data Factory versus Power BI data flows. So I won't cover that again. What I will go through is discussing some of the scenarios and use cases that you would use Power BI data flows for. So one of the core things that we want to do is empower our business users to work with our IT departments together in a collaborative fashion, so we do not have to worry about the, say, old adage of shadow IT. We want to give our business users the ability to use tools that are low code or no code at all, and Power BI data flows fills in that gap nicely. Additionally, we want to make it easy to connect into those databases. And if we have to ask them to bring a JDBC driver, probably not going to be happening. So they can now start to use the multitude of connectors that are in Power BI to connect into relational databases or connect into new data sources like the Dataverse. In the Dataverse, they can go into the CDM folders and start to look at the metadata and the registered data sets that sit out there and pick and choose the data that already exists. Maybe that data hasn't been brought into the data warehouse yet, and they can augment that data and now start to join it together and transform that. Or there might be net new data that they want to register in that Dataverse and bring it into the data lake for analytics later. Now, what's cool about this agile process is that our business users are doing all the prototyping. They are building the MVP application, and we're giving the tools to empower them to do so. When they finally do hit pay dirt and they realize they have the lotto number, now when the usage starts to climb on the consumption of their reports, they can now hand that over to our IT professionals, and they can refactor that code set and reuse those scripts and reproduce it because Power BI data flows enable that. I will go through those capabilities. You can see it live in action through Power Query Online. I will show you some of the different scripting and no-code options. I'll also show you the lineage so we know what we can and cannot do with the platform. And then lastly, I'd like to cover some of the capabilities in Power BI data flows to bring in AI. Now, I won't be going into this in any depth, so if you'd like to get a lot more content or a lot more detail, I highly recommend in the lower right-hand corner a workshop called What the Hack. There's a project in there called BI to AI, and the authors, Chris Kars and Chris Mitchell, has created some wonderful content that will help give you more of a deep dive understanding of how to use AutoML cognitive services within the Power BI desktop. So hopefully that'll be useful for you, and I definitely will say it's a great content. So let's jump in and do a demonstration of Power BI data flows. Let's start off and help you understand what would be the beginning state the user would have before they would use Power BI data flows. And typically what would happen is a Power BI user would be coming into the platform. They would be looking at the Power BI service through the web portal, through their browser. And you can see here, I've opened up a report within the Power BI service, and we can see the worldwide importers sales data. And like any great business analyst, I can see that data across time, across customers, and by different key performance indicators. And so now if I want to go through and start to slice and dice that data, I can click on, say, a particular date and time and see how my KPIs are impacted. I can also start to see if my customers are above or below threshold in terms of their gross margins, and I can start to see that across different data points. What's really nice about this is as I start to click on this, I can start seeing that interactivity across my reports. But what's missing is the why. I'm not understanding what's driving this kind of divergence between some of my best customers and some of my worst customers. And from an exploratory data analysis perspective, I need to find some third-party data sets to help augment this data and give me a little richer information. And so what I've done and what I've seen is for worldwide importers, we actually make available to our customers different online web portals. And we have a lot of web information or reviews on that data. And so I, as a business analyst, will go to our online portals and I'll start downloading that review data. Maybe that review data will give me some insights on what's driving sales. And so what I've done is I've taken that data and I now brought it in, and I will go into our list view within Power BI. This is our workspace. My workspace is called Modern Analytics. And in this workspace, I have a series of data flows. I can bring in review data. I can bring in sales data. I can bring in stock item or product data. And also I can join those two data sets together so I can see for every stock item what was the ratings and the reviews. Now, logically speaking, we all know what I'm doing, but really, is that everything I did, or is there some more to it? So let's look at the lineage of this. And what's nice about Power BI data flows is now I can see the series of steps that I went through. That steps, first from a lineage perspective, helps me understand what were the data sources that I pulled from. Well, I'm pulling sales data from my data warehouse. I'm pulling review data out of my data lake. I'm going in and I'm pulling out stock information. And also, I'm joining that information, the stock item, by the review data so that I can finally roll it up for reporting. Now, what's really cool about this is when we start to bring in some of this different information, I now want to start to transform that data, more than just join it, but also transform. So let's go in and edit this and look at this pipeline. In this pipeline, we have two data sets, review data and a mapping table. That mapping table is actually defining what my product SKUs are and also what my surrogate keys are within my dimension table within Power BI. Like every great business analyst, I love my Excel spreadsheet so I can create my lookup tables. So if we look at that mapping table, this is a CSV file that I brought in from the data lake. You can see that connection. You can see out here that I have a SKU, and I also have my surrogate keys within the data warehouse. And now I can join that data to the stock item table. Before I do that, what I really want to do is bring in that review data. And now within the review data, I can see the same type of information, be it those product SKUs, but I also have rating information, when those ratings happened, who provided them, and there are text comments. So all this information is available to me, and I can quickly see the relationship across that data. I load in that mapping file I spoke of. I bring in my review information. I start to transform that file. And in the end, if we look at all the different steps I took, here's the list of excuse me, transformations that I performed. The sequence I performed them, and as you can tell, I'm using Power Query Online, similar to Power BI Desktop, and I can transform or add columns as needed and look at that data as I want to. Now, I think one of the most important pieces here to highlight is this piece right here, the M scripting language. As one of my bosses had said in the past, you can't automate anything unless you can reproduce it the same way every time. And the best way to do that is through a script. If you had to go through all the steps I went through on a piece of paper, that'd be really hard to reproduce. But through a script, it makes it a lot easier. And the M scripting language provides that for you. So our IT professional can recreate this data flow by just copying and pasting that script and bring it into something like Azure Data Factory. Now, let's take a step back here. When we talk about that data flow and that data set that we're talking about, what we're really trying to do, as I spoke of earlier, is bring it into that roll-up table. I want to join these data sets together. And I want to understand, am I doing an inner join, outer join, left join? What in the world am I doing to get that data? Because that could be another good question that they'll be asking you as a IT pro is, is this data like garbage in, garbage out because you really don't know how to join that data? Or were you smart enough to figure that one out? And luckily in this case, if I click on this particular field here, and I will explode this a little bit, you can see I'm actually doing a left join on this data set. And this data set is bringing information from the review table and the product table, my new DIM table with the old, and now merging those two together. So this will help them understand that level of detail that they're looking for. Now, the final product, which maybe is not the most enlightening, I still have to think through a little bit more of my data, but what's really important to understand is I created a final data set that took all my sales data, Plus, it took my stock items table and created a net new table and appended the ratings and reviews. And I ran even some sentiment analysis on it to see if it was high, medium, or low. This report is giving me the ratings by different sales, by different product SKUs. So hopefully you understand when it comes to Power BI data flows, some of its capabilities, and bringing in that exploratory self-service BI workload is really the key piece for Power BI. Now, let's go into the next piece and talk about the Power BI service. The Power BI service can be now integrated directly with Azure Synapse Analytics. We can use the performance, the security, the workload management of Synapse, plus the in-memory, direct query, or composite model capabilities of Power BI together. That better together story is now available to us without having to bring in other Azure services to support it. If we want to, from a design perspective, we can, but it's not a requirement or a prerequisite. If we're using things such as column store indexes or Synapse Cache, or more importantly, statistics, we can get the optimal performance out of our queries from Power BI to service them directly in Azure Synapse. Now, one of the other great things that we've done with Azure Synapse is we've built in a developer hub within Synapse Analytics Workspace. I'll show that to you shortly. But some of the content that Miguel Myers and Chris Hemmel has put together, these rich data visualizations, I'll bring in and showcase internal to the Synapse Workspace. These data visualizations are more to help you understand how best to design visuals, but this Synapse Analytics demo I'll be showcasing is really just to show you how you can interact with those via the workspace. Now, one of the things that we'll want to do is, as a developer, we can come into the Synapse workspace and have one portal to work from. We don't need to be jumping between Synapse and Power BI to develop that content. And if we create workspaces and create linked services within Synapse Analytics, now we'll be able to see multiple workspaces in our hub that's authorized for me to see. And we can make changes to those reports via the hub as needed. So let's go in and show you a little bit more about Synapse Analytics Workspace and hopefully give you a little more detail on how that works. So let me go full screen here and show you the content here. So this is our workspace. If I come to the home screen here, you'll see this is part of our Modern Analytics Academy. And probably as you've seen through other demonstrations, we have different hubs. And you've probably seen a lot about the Data Hub, a lot about the Integrate Hub. I'm going to jump into the Develop Hub. And in here, that Develop Hub now provides me the ability as a developer to come in and start to build out my own SQL scripts, to build out my own tables or views, my notebooks to maybe run some different data science workloads, and my Power BI platform so that I can connect in and maybe create net new reports or open up reports that sit out there. So let's open up one of those reports that we were just looking at a few minutes ago for the worldwide importers. I will open up that report, and I'll open up the report that I was showing you via the PowerPoint presentation. So you can see here, within this report, we get a quick visualization. If I want to say make a change to this report, I can easily come in here and say change this from a line to a bar chart if I want to, right? And if it looks good, I can always save that as needed. One of the cool things, if I show you the demonstration, the reports that were put together by Miguel, we can also see that we can make some really rich data visualizations because the Power BI service is giving us the ability to edit that as needed. So if we want to say change some of that content and say see this in a tabular view, we can do that. If we want to see this in a map view, we can do that also. Or maybe we want to create net new content and create new reports from scratch. And we can take the data that sits over here within that particular field list and now start to bring in new metrics like say customers and start to slice and dice this data within in this report, maybe by gender, and see that by, let's just say, a donut chart. Now, that addition might have been a requested addition by our user community. Our developer had built that out within the, say, SQL dedicated pool. And now the Power BI report that has a connection directly to that pool can be revised in the hub to add that new content to the report as needed. So when we think about this particular environment, this is not a consumption layer for our end users. This is primarily meant for our developers. Now, with that being said, I'd now like to jump into our next content, and that's Power BI Report Builder. In the Power BI Report Builder, probably a few of you are trying to figure out how is that modern, and what does that have to do with a modern analytics architecture? And one of the things I want to reassure you is, yes, pixel perfect reporting has been around all the way since the early days of SQL Server. We all remember it as reporting services in those old days. But that use case for reporting is still important. If we want to create pixel perfect reports, paginated reports will be the way we do that. I'll spend a few minutes in talking about the differences between the two, but I'll spend a lot more time showcasing that to you in the Synapse environment. So let me talk to you, what is the difference and why would you need paginated versus Power BI reports? The key piece here is paginated reports is making sure that we have static content that's a snapshot of the data at a certain point in time, and it's being published into a template that is like a book of reports that I can read through, and multiple pages will have its own products, maybe its own invoices, maybe its own, excuse me, financial reports, or its own passenger itineraries. But it'll have its own branding, it'll have its own format, and a person will know exactly where to look within that report to find that one piece of information that they're looking for. That's quite different than Power BI reports. In Power BI reports, we are looking at the summary data, but we also want to drill into detail. We want to be interactive and start to cross-analyze that data, not just by looking at it at one point in time, but maybe I want to look at it by customer segment and see how that customer segment is impacting different campaigns and potentially improving my profit margins. That interactivity is what is being done in Power BI reports. And so we'll need both of these tools to give our users a different type of content that they're looking for. Now, when it comes to Power BI paginated reports, one of the great things about it is today it has been modernized and there are new features inside of it that can allow us not just to run it on-premise in SQL Server or through Power BI Report Server. Now we can run it directly within the Power BI service with premium capacity. When we do that, we can now also have data connectors within Power BI Paginated Report that allow us to connect into Synapse directly. And thus, I wouldn't have to use a Power BI data set if I don't want to. And that might be something handy. If I did want to use a Power BI data set, I do have that capability still. And so that won't be, say, removed, or that capability won't be taken away from me. What I can do is I can connect that Power BI paginated report to a data set that maybe a set of interactive reports are using too. And I can share it between those two. And thus now I have a shared data set that has the same common definitions and the same layout and model. And so Power BI can do either option, and that's up to the developer. Now, one of the things that I like to highlight is a session that was done by Peter Myers and Chris Finland. The two of them have a video series called Paginated Reports in a Day. That video series and its link is in the lower left-hand corner. I tell you, go into Microsoft Docs and do a search on Paginated Reports in a Day, and you'll find that video series. It's probably a 3 or 4 hour course that teaches you how to build out net new content and some of the design considerations that you'll need when setting it up. Great session if you're looking for a deep dive discussion on it. Where I will be headed is going through and showcasing and giving you some examples of paginated reports. So let me go back out into my environment and go into some of the reports that I had built out. Now, I'm looking at this from Synapse Analytics. I also will go into the Power BI platform to show it there too, but I can see it in any location. Obviously, as a consumer, I'm not going to be developing it here. But as you can see, when I come into Synapse Analytics Workspace, that content is quickly and readily available for me. If I go back one level and now go into the Power BI service, I can see that same content here in the Power BI service. And so now this is where your consumers would be going for these reports. As I open up the paginated report, this sales analysis data will be highly formatted. If I want to, say, save this as a PDF file, or I want to, say, print it out as a PowerPoint, I can do that. So we can see we have different export formats that allow us to save it or print it as needed. Please don't do a data dump and save it as a CSV file. You can also save and print it or download that report as needed. But what's nice about this report, it's not all or completely static. What we can do is we can bring parameters in this and look at this over time if we want to. Or if we want to, say, drill into a little bit and look at some of the different salespeople within a given region, we can see the grand total and the subtotals. Now, key point, I got my top line number. I can see my subtotals and subtotals of those totals. But if I wanted to see this data, say not just by region, but I also wanted to see this by customer segment, I don't have a visual over here that would help me interact with the two. And that's the difference about Paginated Report. It's going to be focused on one key piece of information. As you can see in this example, it's about sales. Now, that same thing I can recreate if I want to inside of, and let me find it for a second, inside of Power BI reports. I have now a similar kind of layout. It's a tabular format. You can see here we have a title and a little bit of a brand, and we have the ability to use a parameter file too to say add or remove parameters as needed. But I don't know if this is really like a report or if this is really a dashboard. Now you can see here, I still have that interactivity that I was looking for earlier. I can click and start to slice and dice that data as needed. And I can come over here and start to interact with it too. But that look and feel is not going to be the same. Now, a great example that has been shared with us and something I like to showcase, because this is kind of like your prototypical example of a, say, highly formatted pixel perfect canned report, is this report for our local garage sale. If we're trying to see how much we sold based on our different products that we're selling within our garage, here's a really nice paginated report done by the Paginated Report Bear. You can see he wants to see Mickey and Brownie and Tiggy and the whole crew. And as he goes in, he can quickly get an idea about the sales performance. And as we update that view, they can see for that given person how that actual performance was. And if they'd like to, they can actually now start to print that out and provide that to their end customer. So hopefully you get a quick idea about the differences between paginated and Power BI reports. I will now head over and talk a little bit more about our Power BI embedded environment. So let's cover Power BI embedded. In the Power BI embedded space, as we spoke of in the reference architecture at the beginning, we want to empower our ISVs to be able to use the content that they have within their business application without having to do a lot of refactoring. What that means is that we don't want them to have to start to figure out what library of data visualizations is the richest, or what set of queries do I need that say have T-SQL compliance that would be compatible with the databases that I'm leveraging. That kind of stuff, probably the data connectors and the visualization catalog, they don't want to mess with. Thus, we will provide is the Power BI service. That tenant that sits out there will have a set of REST APIs, and that tenant now is what our partners' business applications can call to start to retrieve and render and work with the different data visualizations. One of the things you'll see here in the Power BI embedded Contoso sales demo is this is a great demo that was done by our product team. It goes in and does a nice overview of its capabilities, and I'll walk you through some of those capabilities that sit out there. Now, when we think about a modern architecture for our ISVs, what we're really suggesting to them, and this is probably something that new that they haven't used in the past, is to use that Power BI service and those REST APIs to build out that framework. They can do it through their own custom build applications. If they wanted, we can even have system integrators use some of these embedded capabilities to build this out, potentially in a SharePoint-like environment. But in the majority of the cases, they would be used within an ISV, using Node, using Python, using C#, their favorite language. But if they're going to defer and let us build out those REST APIs, one of the central questions always going to be asked is, well, what set of APIs do you have available to us? And so when we think of our, say, Swagger for Power BI, we call it our Power BI Playground. And our Power BI Playground does a nice job of defining all those different REST APIs, but also giving you an interactive environment so you can see them work in action. So if you want to understand how you do edit versus create, if you want to understand how you export a given visual, if you want to understand how you do dynamically create a visual, you can all do that through the playground. So let me jump in for my last demonstration on the Power BI embedded environment and go through and hopefully highlight some of those capabilities that you can use with this platform. So one of the key things within this overall environment, as you can see, is a white label experience. We are not bringing in any theming for Power BI, so the black and gold colors are totally gone. Down here, if you do want to look at this in the future, you can see the playground I spoke of and the source code, and I'll go to the source code shortly. But before I do that, I'll jump into the salesperson and show you some of this demo content. Now, as I said, purely their business application. You can see the wrapper that they have for the headers within their application, the branding that they have, and the MVP status of their application. You can see inside of that, we have a nice layout of different data visualizations that sit out there. These are different visuals that sit within a given report. Each one of these visuals are being laid out in the format you can see here. And if they wanted, they can lay out in any format they want, be it a grid or maybe as one big visual. As you see, as I go through each one of these different menus, we can see additional information, not just the home data, but the leads information. We can see that across different visualization types that sit out there. And we can also, if we want to, add new leads to that. I won't click on that for now, but that can show you some interactivity within the platform. More importantly, I can go out there and look at the opportunities that people have. And so if I want to see what are the top 5 opportunities out there that are open or that are lost, we can do that. And also we can bring in some custom visualizations through this funnel chart. So it shows a really rich visualization capabilities and also very simple, easy to use, beautiful UI for their business application. And if they want, these 3 tabs were for visualizations, but for that business application, if they're trying to say, build out a project planning application, look at the different projects that are on the calendar for the next month, they can have that application as just another item within this overall workflow. So these are all the different capabilities that sit out there. Hopefully you start to understand what Power BI Embedded can do. One of the things I would suggest is to go into our GitHub repo that sits out there. You can see this Contoso sales demo. It's a public repo. It takes you to this link I just showed you, and also contains a lot of the content that is out there and some of the architecture diagrams to get started. There's also a developer sample version that does this in Python and C# and Node if you want to use it in other code sets for the future. So let me jump back into the last part of the presentation and cover some of the content as it relates to our Power Apps platform. Now, when we talked at the very beginning of our modern analytics architecture, one of the core central things that we were talking about is making it more agile. We want to empower that business user to do their own prototyping, build their own MVP applications, So when they discover or when they start to build out that, say, next generation application, they can do that without a lot of coding skills. It empowers a lot more users if it is low, no code. So when it comes to that Power Platform, it is more than just Power BI. We have other tools out there called Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agent. And each one of those tools is another tool in your tool belt. For that business user, if they want to do analytics, Power BI is their game. If they want to create a new application, they can use Power Apps. If they want to automate different workflows, they can use Power Automate. And if they want to make intelligence virtual agents or bots, they can use Power Virtual Agent. What's great is all these tools share the same set of data connectors, the same set of AI capabilities, and also the same set of Dataverse or schemas for data, metadata catalogs. Now, that should make this a very simple and easy to use tool, not just from a low-code, no-code perspective, but also from a reusability perspective. So let's jump into the first one and talk about Power Apps. Power Apps is our low-code approach to building applications. And if you want to build an application that's maybe retrieving data from your database to show you the list of products, maybe you want to create a metadata catalog, and you have a product dimension with a series of SKUs, and you want the user to define not just the child SKU, but what is the product category or the product subcategory that that product is part of. We can create a web application that would define or say retrieve all the individual children. And then through the UI, we can start to build out different parents. And then we can start to group those children by parents. And in the end, we can write that back to the database. And through that web application, that business user can be in charge of building out that product catalog. Or maybe we're in the finance department and they have their month-end reports and they want to basically look at forecast numbers. They might need the ability to do write back where they say change a few drivers. Maybe they're trying to understand shipping costs and they're looking at fuel costs as a way of forecasting what are potential shipping costs that would impact their operating expenses. And so they need to update that particular fuel price. And today fuel has changed, so they want to go into Power Apps and update that particular fuel cost. When they submit that fuel cost, there will be an approval button on that particular web app. And that approval button will then kick off the Power Automate workflow. In that workflow, Power Automate, through that fuel cost, can send an email to the stakeholder or the business owner for that particular forecast. They can see that Jason Virtue has went out and made a request to update the fuel costs. And once they approve that in the email, that'll kick off the second step in Power Automate to then go in and kick off the Power BI data flow to load that data into our data warehouse. And now that data will be updated. We'll insert a record into our audit table so we can see when and what was changed. And now we have an end-to-end workflow that sits out there. So when we talk about Power Automate, it's to automate those business processes. And I would say it's the simplified version of Logic Apps. It can also be maybe equated a little bit to Data Factory, but more to Logic Apps. And this will now start to empower the user to do it themselves. So hopefully this is making sense to you. One of the last things I like to go to is the Power Virtual Agents. And that's really our last, tool in the tool belt when it comes to the Power Platform. The Power Virtual Agent is something that allows us to provide, an interactive Q&A format for given chat sessions. If we want to have a bot that, answers questions about our metadata and or maybe answer questions about our travel expenses, we can put a bot or a virtual agent into Power Apps. And now, based on the catalog it's sitting on top of and the questions that we're asking, it'll know the answers to retrieve, or it'll know the people to route you to. And so Power Virtual Agent is another tool that can help out with, say, frequently asked questions or routing from a virtual agent to a live agent. So hopefully that made sense to you, and hopefully in its summary, you're starting to understand what that modernization effort is for Power BI. We went through a lot of different components in this section, and some of the key things I want to highlight is the need to modernize your data warehouse to bring that logical data warehouse into the picture. As you bring that in, you're going to enable new workloads. Our ability to do exploratory data analysis, data discovery, and also our ability to do data science. With that logical data warehouse, now we'll reuse the same tools we had in the past, the Power BI service, Paginated Reports, excuse me, net new tools like Power BI data flows, or even things like Power BI Embedded or Power Platform, but we'll have a richer set of data to look at, and we'll have more scenarios or analysis that we can conduct. And that's really the power of modernizing your platform. You will not have to buy a bunch of new Power BI tools, but what you will need to do is start to design them in a way that enables your users to go out and bring in their own data, enrich the data sets that they're used to, and start to explore that data to understand how or what to bring in for the next release of your enterprise data warehouse. So hopefully that session was helpful for you. Hopefully you learned a lot from it. I will sign off here and say thank you for attending. If you have any questions for me or any of us, as I said in the earlier, please feel free to go to aka.ms/MAA. And you'll see a lot of rich content that you can use for resources, and hopefully that'll be a self-service portal for you to learn more about. So again, thank you for attending this session. I really appreciate the time you spent, and definitely look forward to talking to you more. Take care.